Welcome to the Seen and Heard podcast. I'm Dr. Cathy Wield, and in this series we explore the life and stories of ex-boarders and how they've fared since leaving school. I'm an ex-boarder myself, and I've written about my own recovery journey in Unshackled Mind, a doctor's story of trauma, liberation and healing. But whether boarding school was good, positive or completely the opposite, one thing's for sure, we all have a story to tell, and our school days will almost certainly have had a bearing on who we are today. I have the pleasure, though, today of interviewing Katinka Blackford Newman, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, a journalist who writes for national newspapers, a life coach, and the founder and CEO of Antidepressant Risks. Welcome, Katinka.
Hi.
Reading your list of achievements, Katinka, it's not immediately obvious that you've had to overcome some extraordinarily serious challenges. And yet now you're working as a life coach for many high-performing professionals.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Well, what can I say except to say that, perhaps there's a link there, isn't there? That actually quite often people who have to overcome challenges early on go on to become high achievers because they're using achievement as a way of getting recognition, getting love, all of those sorts of things. So perhaps those things are not unconnected.
No, I totally agree with you. And do you feel that your school days actually have helped you in this way?
Well, let me just put it in some sort of context.
Yeah.
Which is that I went to a boarding school. Well, first of all, I went to a boarding school from the age of 8 as a weekly boarder, and that was just a sort of flurry into boarding school life. And then I left, and then I chose actually to go back to a boarding school when I was 11, turning 12. I sensed that there was a lot that was happening in my family life, and that it was going to be the best place for me. I don't know if I hadn't chosen that, whether my family would have chosen that for me. But it was at a time when my father had become very, very ill. He had had a stroke and he became very depressed.
Okay.
We lost the family home. My family then moved briefly to a hotel in Torquay. So there wasn't really a sort of family home, and my father was not only depressed, but he was actually suicidal, and that was not a good environment for me to be in at the time. So I think that there was a sort of sense, I had my own sense that I needed to be somewhere where there was a community, and that community might not be ideal, and it never was ideal, but it was going to be a container.
Yeah.
As my family sadly fell apart because of my father's illness, and eventually he took his life when I was 12 and I was at boarding school.
Gosh, I'm so sorry.
And whilst I was, I would never describe those years as particularly happy years. I believe that I was probably in the best possible place.
Yeah.
That it wasn't going to be easy anywhere. But actually being in that environment with other children, with other people, with some sort of a community was the best place for me at the time.
I can see.
Not to say that it was in any way ideal. And not to say that there were times of bleak unhappiness.
Yeah.
That's not entirely to do with being at the school, but because of the circumstances that I found myself in at the age of 12, having, lost my family home and having lost my father.
I mean, gosh, what a lot to deal with at such a young age.
It was a lot to deal with. But I was lucky to have older siblings. I was also lucky to have a mother who is not around. She died in 2013. But I remember somebody saying to me once that the greatest gift that you can give your children is to show them that when there is adversity, that you can survive, that you can get over it.
Yeah.
And I had that in my mother, that she was made of steel. You know, we lost all the family, all the money. We didn't have any money. She went back to work as a journalist. She sold her jewelry so that she could pay for the school fees. She just got on with it. She was the best that she could possibly be. But at the same time, I had lost the family home. So there wasn't really anywhere for me to come back to at the weekends. So the boarding school became kind of like a surrogate home for me.
Yeah.
And the friendships that I made were incredibly valuable for me. I mean, life-saving in a sense.
I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? And, it's actually good to hear that sometimes, even though, a lot of people who will be listening have had terrible times at boarding school, but there's something very different about the fact that it can be a place of refuge when necessary. And I mean, actually, in a strange way, it's heartening that it's not all bad all the time. And I know, that, there's a lot of move to stop young children boarding, and I think that's completely right. However, we must also acknowledge that there are times where places like this can be helpful.
Yes. And actually, when I look back, a lot of the people that a lot of the girls there, they came from very, very challenging circumstances. Single parent families, astonishingly challenging circumstances. And for them, probably as well, it was the safest place to be.
That's so interesting.
Because life isn't always ideal. People don't always have these ideal families. And sometimes, a boarding school can be a place of refuge. It can be not ideal, but the next best thing. As it was for me, really. It was the best place for me to be at the time.
And it sounds as though you actually had a school which was more supportive than many, maybe.
I think it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I mean, back then, there was there was no conversation about mental health, was there? I mean, there was nobody was sort of saying, oh, by the way, Katinka, you understand that your dad's taken his life. Maybe you might need a little bit of, help or therapy or whatever. That was not a conversation that was ever had. The story I make up, I don't know, but the story I make up is that probably now there would be more support in a boarding school for somebody who had lost a parent, possibly.
Yeah, one would hope so.
One would hope. But that wasn't a conversation that anybody had at the time with me. So, yes, I think it was a reasonably supportive place. It was in no way ideal, but there was structure. There were all the things that we know that are actually really good for mental health, actually, if you think about it. Exercise, structure, friendship, connection, a community. Those are all the things that we know are very, very important for mental health. Those were all the things that I would not have had if I had been at home. With a mother who had to go back to work, who was understandably emotionally vulnerable because of the suicide of my father. it was, I wouldn't have had any of those things.
Mm.
I had all of that, and very, very, very valuable friendships as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
with kids who had equally, if not worse, challenges to contend with.
And also that goes against, some of the other stories. Like for myself, most of the children there were those who were sent because it was felt to be good for them from very stable families. And, I was sent from overseas. So actually, it was probably much more of a wrench for me than, say, for you when you were actually going from a situation which was incredibly difficult at home. But
Yeah. Um,
talking about your friendships, because there aren't many people who I still relate to from school. It sounds like you had some very good, healthy relationships at school.
I had some great relationships. Sadly, the two people I was closest to have died, actually. One
Oh, I'm
tragically when she
so
was very
sorry.
young at 18, but
Wow.
another more recently in
Mm,
the last 10 years.
mm,
I see a few people vaguely, but
mm,
there's nobody that I actually keep in touch with
mm, mm.
that time, if I'm
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. And then moving on, you left that school at what age?
Well, I decided that I wanted to that I wanted to leave after O levels.
Yeah,
I was concerned about my mother,
yeah,
and I think at the time then she was financially getting back on her feet, and so she was going to move to London, and I think I just wanted to change, and I wanted to be with her. I think I sensed that that she would be better with me
yeah.
somehow. So I moved to a day school in London. Um, I'm not sure who can say whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision? But there were consequences of that because the school that I had left
Mm,
was academically very strong, and the school that I ended up in was academically very weak. And it was sort of challenging as well because my mother
mm,
had to go away for work, so she was away for 4 weeks as I did my A levels. So there were consequences to that decision,
yeah,
really. So
yeah. And yet, through your overcoming, you then went on yourself to become a journalist, or did you go into the documentary making straight from school?
well, I went to university, and then I was very lucky. I landed a job on the That's Life program with Esther Ranson,
Yeah.
and that was that was a sort of the most incredible gift.
Mm,
And it gave me a appetite for campaigning journalism, really. I guess probably it had sort of, I suppose it tuned into a sense that I already had from kind of being on the wrong side of the tracks. The other consequence of being in that boarding school was that we didn't have any money much of the time. And so, suddenly I was, well, not suddenly, I was always in an environment where people seemed to have a lot more money than
mm,
we did because we'd lost all of our money.
yeah,
And that made me sort of very self-conscious,
yeah.
and very, I didn't feel that I could invite people home. And there were a lot of people with sort of very grand houses and what appeared to be stable families. I don't know if they were
Yeah,
or not,
yeah,
whether that was the story that I made up. Um, and it sort of the way that it played out for me was that I remember really seeking out people who had more hardship than me. So I was a rebel, so I ran away from home occasionally and just hung out with homeless people and drug
did
addicts and
you?
stuff.
Wow.
I did, because it was just kind of like I wanted to be the rich one.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So I think that, somewhere, in that sort of melee, there was something around sort of inequality or miscarriages of justice, or life being unfair or whatever.
Yeah.
That then when I landed on the That's Life program, which was all about championing the underdog, there was something about that I found really exciting,
Yeah.
about and about the fact that you could change the law, which we could. It had the most extraordinary power at the time. There were 20. We had an audience of 20 million viewers, unheard of now.
Yes.
And so shit happened.
Yep. Yeah.
Laws were changed. The
Yeah.
program went out on Sunday night,
Yeah.
and MPs would take notice, and laws would be changed, and that was extremely exciting.
Yeah.
For me. And probably, yes, it had something to do with feeling like an underdog myself
Yeah.
at boarding school, and feeling like the poor kid on the block kind of thing. So when I landed that job, I just felt like I'd come home.
Yeah.
Really. And also it was a family as well. And it's a fact that That's Life family is one that continues. We're all on a WhatsApp group.
Amazing.
All those people still, all these years later. I was only in
Yeah.
my early 20s. It was in the 80s
Yeah.
that I was there. But we have a WhatsApp group, and there is a That's Life family.
That's incredible. Gosh, it's really interesting to hear how That's Life was such a community. But you moved on from there, didn't you? Or what happened?
Well, I moved on from there, and because I became very interested in making documentaries, and so I'm making my own films. So I just moved on from there, and I moved into documentaries, where I stayed for many, many years making films. Always, I suppose, attracted to subjects about the underdog, about miscarriages of justice, people who are outliers, people who, yes, those sorts of things, sort of films that were about sort of human, about human psychology, I
Sure.
suppose,
Yeah.
or crime, but not just crime, what was behind that crime, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
made films about eating disorders. I made films about people who smuggled drugs, about a woman whose son had been killed by her daughter-in-law in the Philippines. I mean, those sorts of films were things, extremes that sort of interested me, I suppose. And also triumphs over adversity, those sorts of things.
And were you free from adversity yourself? Leading question.
Well, no. I mean, I suppose that's what had sort of, driven me to it. And so all of that continued until there was just, there was a total changing point in my life, which took me to the place that I am now with campaigning for awareness about antidepressants. So I, then had, I had a successful career as a filmmaker. I got married, had 2 children, and so had kind of created the sort of picture perfect family life that I hadn't had as a child. So you could argue that possibly that family life was sort of built on an old wound. Effectively, that it meant more than that. It was sort of repairing a wound rather than was just a nice thing to have, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So when that marriage broke up, which interestingly enough was 12 years in, also, remember I'd lost my family age 12. So the farmhouse table and, kitchen farmhouse, that sort of vibe that I'd recreated, that I'd lost as a 12-year-old, was under threat again.
Yeah.
And so to begin with, I coped very well with the end of the marriage. And then it had been my assumption that my husband would leave me in the house with the children. We had this beautiful big Victorian house. That was my assumption. So for 8 months, I was, happily under that illusion. And it was just the loss of the marriage that I adapted to very well, actually. I was completely okay with it. And as one might expect, having had a childhood that was about reinvention, survival, loss, I was able to cope with becoming a single parent quite well, because I had a role model, and because the shit had hit the fan before and I'd survived. So why would I not survive again?
Yeah.
So actually, when my marriage broke up, I coped much better than my husband, who came from a very, very solid background. His parents would never have separated, and he came from a very stable background. So instability was something that he was unable, or found it very difficult to cope with. He would have stayed there forever. I was like, hey, don't worry, we'll just all kind of get on, and But what completely threw me was the loss of this family home that I had assumed that I would keep, and that I had told the children, who are age 11 and 12, that we would definitely keep. So when it became apparent that we were going to have to sell that, I really went into a spin and couldn't sleep. And so I went to the doctor for sleep. I had some sleeping tablets. I took those. I went to the doctor for more sleeping tablets. He wouldn't give me any.
Right.
And I went to, stupidly, private doctor.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, I can only give you one sleeping pill or whatever, but I'll give you an antidepressant as well, because that will help you to sleep.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm one of the few people that have a very, very bad reaction to antidepressants. So just after 2 pills, I went into a toxic delirium, as can happen when people have very bad reactions to antidepressants.
Yeah.
So I went into a toxic delirium, thought that I had killed the children, was hallucinating wildly. I ended up in a private hospital. When the effects of the pill wore off, I said, can I go home now? They said, no, not really, because yesterday you were sort of, talking madness and thought you'd kill the children. So they detained me and they gave me more antidepressants and antipsychotics. And of course, if you react badly to one, you react badly to all of them generally. So immediately I had another adverse reaction, and what followed was a year of extreme illness caused by the drugs that they were giving me. And in that time, I was polydrugged. I was given more and more antidepressants and antipsychotics to combat the side effects of the antidepressant and antipsychotic that they'd given me. So it was more and more. So in the end, I was on 7 or 8 different drugs, all sorts of diagnoses. As you know, you've been through the same thing. Yes, everything, treatment-resistant depression, bipolar. I mean, the lot. All of the time, I knew that it was the drugs that were making me ill.
Yeah.
I became literally catatonic. I was, I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't wash myself. I put on 4 stone. It was, I lost everything in that year. I lost my children. I was detained most of the time in hospital. Obviously, I couldn't work. I couldn't do, I couldn't do anything. And then I was very lucky because the insurance ran out. I ended up in a NHS hospital and they detoxed me off all of the drugs.
They didn't know, though, at that stage it was the drugs that were the problem, did they?
No, they didn't. They were just kind of like
fortuitous.
They were just like, let's take her off all that lot and start again, basically.
Yeah.
They took me off all of it. It was awful. I mean, an incredibly dangerous thing of them to do.
Yeah.
as you know, detoxing somebody just
Yeah.
off, you know,
Just like that.
just
Yeah.
like that was hugely irresponsible, very, very dangerous, extremely painful for me.
Yeah.
Thank goodness I was locked up, because quite honestly, I could easily have taken my life at the
Yeah.
time. You know,
Yeah.
the effects of coming off all of that lot were so, the effects on my body was
Yeah.
so extreme, that I think that all I wanted to do was end my life.
Yeah.
So yes, awful, but I was very, very lucky, because 3 or 4 weeks later, I woke up and I was better, completely better. The drugs had left my system,
Yeah.
and I had been completely cured.
I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? For somebody who doesn't know about these things, the thought that you can go along to your doctor with something which is perfectly reasonable, that's what we do, isn't it? We have something happens and we think, oh, let's just go to the doctor, and you've no idea that you can just take something which you're told is safe and effective, and it actually, I mean, it ruined your life in that. I mean, obviously you've come back from that, which is a remarkable feat in itself, but it's really serious, isn't it?
Well, Cathy, I mean, you know, you had a far, far worse. So
Well,
my story is a walk in the park compared to
I,
you.
I thankfully we don't have a sort of league table of
Yeah, but if you
you know,
did,
who's had the worst experience.
would win
But
it.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think your story is also unbelievably remarkable, and you know, it's just incredible that you came back from it. And you know, you're one of the few people I know who can talk about it like this, and talk about, you know, the fact that you know, you thought you'd killed your children, and that's so taboo in our society. And they then, I assume, suspected that you might, you know, have a tendency to attack other people. And you know, I mean, this is a drug-induced effect, and here we are doling these out willy-nilly.
Yes. Well,
So
I mean, let's be fair though, Cathy, you know, it's a very rare effect.
it is a very rare effect.
It is
Yeah,
very, very rare. So, you know, the
we
journey that
don't
I
know,
went
do
on,
we?
you don't know,
Yeah,
you don't know, and the important thing is that it is recognised. And I
yeah,
remember, so I
yeah,
had obviously had a background as an investigative journalist, and so even as I was still detained in hospital, once I was better, I Googled side effects of antidepressants, and I found Professor David Healy, who's the world's
yeah.
leading expert on this subject. And when I spoke to him from hospital, he said, I said, is it possible that an antidepressant could have caused this? Because I was like, what the hell has happened in the last
Mm,
year? You know, I took a pill, I thought I'd kill the children, and then the rest of the year was just like this blur of just kind of like, didn't really quite understand it, trying to unpack it.
mm.
And he said, look, you're lucky that you didn't kill yourself or your children, because
Yeah,
that's what usually happens when people go into an antidepressant induced toxic delirium.
yeah.
And then after that, there was a, you know, journey of discovery as I spoke to people who had killed their children,
Mm,
you know, including somebody called David Carmichael, who you may have come across, who actually, you know, he did kill his
yeah,
son as a
yeah.
result of this. And I'm in touch with the family of another man who is in North Carolina, detained in prison, perfectly sane man who stabbed to death his twin daughters.
Yeah.
He would have why would he do that? However, he'd just taken Prozac, and he basically said when asked why did he kill his twin daughters, he said, because the lawn sprinklers told me to do it. This is somebody with no history of
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
illness who suddenly went berserk after taking Prozac. And, and actually for the people who are listening to this in disbelief, there are courts around the world that have ruled this to be the case.
Yeah.
In many instances. So yes, it's rare, but it does happen. And there have been many, many successful cases against drug companies, both civil and also it's being found to be the case in criminal cases as well, where people...
Yeah. I think what scares me the most is that actually within, our group here, the listeners here, there are quite a lot of people who've, for want of a better word, been psychiatrised because of the things that happened to them as children. So actually, as adults, quite not surprisingly, some of us, as a result of our childhood, and it doesn't matter whether it's boarding school or in actual fact it's something else, or as what happened to you, something happens in your adult life and it brings up some of these traumas, and you go to your doctor and you pick up a prescription because they tell you this will help and it's safe and it's effective. And that's still the mantra today. And I mean, not many of us actually read the small print, even when it's on there.
Completely.
And end up taking something and then, right, as you say, it's incredibly rare, but incredibly rare should not stop us from knowing that these effects are possible. And our nearest and dearest, or there needs to be somebody who's able to step in and say, hang on a minute, this is definitely not the way they normally react.
Well, yes, Cathy, I mean, yes, it is very rare, but as I'm preaching to the converted here, but what isn't incredibly rare is having side effects of these. That is incredibly common and happens in 50, well, according to, to later studies, that happens in 50% of cases. And I think what concerns me is that people feel that they have to have a diagnosis in order to get help. And usually with a diagnosis comes a pill.
Yeah.
They are not actually warned about the side effects of. That's the concerning thing. And so although I didn't get any support or very little, support or for what I was going through age 12 or 13, what might well happen now would be that someone would, slap on a diagnosis of kind of, I don't know what it would be, post-traumatic stress or whatever. And I'd be given a diagnosis and I would have been given a pill.
When you were that age.
That age, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And the effects of that would have possibly been far more serious than a year in hospital. It could have been many, many, many years of being psychiatrized and being given more drugs and more drugs to combat the side effects of those drugs and so on and so forth. And those are the people that we hear regularly from at the not-for-profit that I have now started up as a result of my experience, called Antidepressant Risks, where we help people who not necessarily have had a kind of like dramatic adverse reaction to a drug. It's far more common that they didn't have an adverse reaction at all, but that actually they just were given a drug. They became, one's body becomes dependent on that drug. You need more to get the same effect, or you suffer side effects, and then you're given another drug another drug, another diagnosis, and before you know it, you're on 3 or 4 massive side effects. In some instances, causing sexual dysfunction. I mean, all sorts of things. It just all, there are all sorts of consequences. So I think my main point is that actually I'm very saddened that nowadays, in order to get support it seems that you need to have some kind of diagnosis.
Yes.
Rather than to just say, actually, I need a bit of help. I need a bit of
Yeah.
support. I don't know
Yeah.
what the label, I don't have a label.
Why should I have a label? I'm
Yeah.
just, I'm
I
just
don't
being
have a
me.
label and I don't want a drug, but can you
Yeah.
please give me some
Yeah.
support?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it seems that we've just gone to this other extreme
Yeah.
now where everybody has a label.
Yeah. It's very hard. And I mean, I think what's so fantastic is that you did go through merry hell for more than a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you have come through that, and actually you're thriving and you are helping others now. And you're actually a life coach for people who in all sorts of walks of life, but
Yes.
professionals, etc.
Well, yes. I mean, I help people get unstuck because I think probably I was became aware of the fact that it's well, if depression isn't caused by a chemical imbalance, then it is caused by a combination of challenging circumstances and your reaction to that.
Mm.
Usually you can't do an awful lot about those challenging circumstances, or there is a limit to what you might be able to do about a divorce, job loss, getting older, retirement, whatever. But what you can change is your reaction to it and your mindset, and focusing on the things that you can control rather than things that you can't control. And about well, it's not so much what happens to you, but it's the story that you make of that. I mean, all of those things are fantastically useful. They've been very useful for me in rebuilding my life. I suppose, looking back, I didn't have those coping tools at all. I've probably done quite a lot of therapy looking back in the past, but did I have really good self-talk? Did I have really good coping mechanisms? Was I able to distance myself from the sort of the thoughts of, oh, I've messed up as a mother because I'm taking away my children's family home and it's all going to be a disaster. I couldn't have those thoughts anymore. I couldn't, and people that I work with, I would help them to challenge those sorts of thought patterns. So, I mean, I'm very blessed in that I now have a career where I can help people and where I can give them alternatives to medication. I mean, that's not to say that I'm sure that some of my clients do take medication. It's not, I don't only work with people who don't take medication, but but I hope that I'm able to help them to navigate challenges in a way that gets results.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listening to this will definitely understand the fact that, for many of us, because of our childhoods, we've learnt coping skills which are not very helpful once you get into adult life. I know, for me, my major coping skill was when I was unhappy, work harder, which is brilliant when you're a junior doctor, until it isn't, when suddenly trying to work your way out of difficult circumstances exhausts you. And there are similar things, and it took me really many years before anybody was actually able to point this out and to actually say, these were skills that you learned as a young child in order to survive your situation, but actually they're not helping you now. And you need
That's
to
very
learn
interesting.
a different way.
Very interesting. So I run a 7-week mental fitness course, which is entirely about that. It's about our saboteurs, our old coping mechanisms, And one of those that you have described is the hyperachiever coping mechanism. And it's all about recognizing that and recognizing how, when it can be useful, and recognizing then also when it tips over into not being useful, into a muscle that is being overused. So all of these coping mechanisms are usually, well, always an amplification of your of your positive qualities.
Yeah.
But it's when they tip over into negative survival mechanisms, which are actually just stopping you from being able to relax. Because if your identity is absolutely fixed on achieving, it means that you can never relax. It means that you are prone to burnout, which I'm guessing is where you ended up.
Yeah. Well, and there was that, and I mean, there was so many sort of aspects, I think, of coping, and another one was denial of self, denial of my feelings, and that was very much related to my childhood, where I was very, very miserable for very many years. So what did I learn to do? I buttoned down the hatches, keep it underneath, and you know, they say that boarding school children are very good spies. Well, I wouldn't have been, because I did actually show my emotions, certainly when I was going back to school. But then, you know, I had learned when I was in that environment, the thing you do is you don't show them. And similarly, working in medicine, you don't show your emotions there either, or at least not you're not going to show your own feelings of being unhappy or anxious or stressed or what have you. And of course, once I was on these drugs, what they did was they shut me down. So coming off them was very interesting, because having been in this sort of two-dimensional world, it opened up. And I mean, I was fortunate in that I didn't know how to come off them, except to do it slowly. And it took me 3 years. But the world started to open up, and now I understand so much more about how emotions are actually our friends, even if people think they're negative. They serve a purpose.
Absolutely, they are our compass, aren't they?
Yes.
Our compass. So so would you say that what the survival mechanism was, being, you were a pleaser? Is that what you mean by shutting your emotions? Were you a pleaser?
Well, there was that, but there was also the fact that at the school I was in, if you showed that you were unhappy or homesick, you were weak.
Right.
And that also went into medicine, that, you know, people who were depressed were weak. They were poor characters. So it was more than that. It was almost sort of I don't know. You were a lesser character if you showed how you were feeling.
Right. Got it. Yeah.
So it meant it's a betrayal of yourself, of who you are.
Yes.
And actually, my self-esteem was terrible. You know, I look back on those years, and the self-talk was really poor.
Yes.
And, you know, but when I'm my normal self now, and for many years, thankfully, you know, I don't, none of us are perfect. We don't get it right, do we? But much better place, and it's possible. And I think that's a great message. You know, we look at your life and you can see it, you can say, well, you know, actually you've been through horrendous things, but here you are, and it's possible to live despite what's happened. We're incredibly resilient as human race.
Yes, we are resilient. But also, all of these things are just learning. You know, they're all gifts if you can use them. They're all, you know, I wouldn't be the person that I am without the adversity that I'd had.
Yeah.
Effectively, that all of these things you can use for you in order to, and I count myself as very lucky because I have the gift of contribution of being able to actually just use that experience to help people. And that is something that not many people have. They don't have having a purpose is a fantastic thing to be able to actually help other people, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
an easy thing to find, and it found me. So I feel very blessed in that respect.
Yeah. So you've always had a sort of heart for injustice. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and what a huge injustice it is that millions of people are being given a drug without being told of the side effects. So I'm not anti-medication. I am pro-informed consent. I just want people to understand what the risks are. That's why our not-for-profit is called Antidepressant Risks.
Yeah.
It's not called Don't Take Antidepressants.
Yes. I think it's been amazing talking to you today. And I think that the people who listen to this, who have had difficulties in childhood for whatever reason, many of them from Seen and Heard will relate that to their experience as children being sent away from school. But you're an inspiration, and it's great to meet you and talk to you.
Well, and for you, Cathy, I mean, gosh, your journey is extraordinary, and you have been through so much and come out the other end. So,
well, good to talk to you, and let's meet again sometime soon.
definitely, thank you so much.